let's paint a couple of elephants to practice these blends. They're ideal for wet in wet wash because they're grey, but we don't want to paint in grey, do we? We like colours. In each of these Ellies, I'm going to show you different combinations of pigment colours. So first of all, I'm going to use yellow ochre, a semi-opaque colour, Prussian blue, a transparent colour, and alizarin crimson, a transparent colour. And these three together are going to make my grey. Start with the lightest colour because I want to paint first the light of the elephant. In watercolour, we work from light to dark, so therefore we put our lightest colour, our lightest tones on first. I'm working with a size 12 sable brush, and I can paint the whole shape of this Ellie with the yellow ochre because the yellow ochre is going to go under the red and the blue. Not too strong a colour. This is an opaque colour. If we get it too dark, we know what happens. It will muddy the painting. The next colour, the red, is less wet than the yellow ochre because there's already water on the paper from the previous wash. And we only need to paint this in areas that are darker than the light of the Ellie. We've got pink Ellie now, haven't we? Yeah. And we allow the blending to take place on the paper, trusting that the watercolour knows what it's doing. And now we go in with the blue. And this is going to be less wet than the alizarin was because there's already moisture on the paper from the previous two washes. And we go in from the dark side, and this is really for the darkest parts of the Ellie, but not the shadows cast behind the ear, because we're going to go in with one more wash to pick up those details. To everywhere that's in shadow, for all the bottom part of the Ellie is in shadow. And as the colours blend on the paper, you can see them turning to a grey. Now we're going to mix neat alizarin, neat Prussian blue, pick out those darks. And we're not going to add the yellow ochre because if we did, because it's opaque, it will muddy this colour rather than keep it clear. And this is dry colour going into the wet wash. We need it really dry because we want to go straight in, and we're controlling the spread of this water by the amount of pigment on our brush. So we're just now painting the darkest darks of the Ellie. Swish of the tail, and the last thing is the eye. A bit dark under there, perhaps. I think that's our Ellie done, actually, don't you? But by letting the colours blend together on the paper, remember the first wash is the wettest. The next one is less wet. The next one is less wet. And so it goes on because there is gathering water on your paper from all the previous washes. It's not just the colour that matters. It's whether it's transparent or opaque as to how it's going to affect the appearance of the watercolour. Let's take totally transparent colours. 3 carbon colours, quinacridone gold, quinacridone red and indanthrene blue. And let's paint another Ellie. Quinacridone gold is a very strong transparent yellow. So we need it very pale. We need to break down the pigment, mix it with the water, and make sure we have plenty in the brush for creating the whole shape of our elephant, just as we did with the yellow ochre. But because it's an intense colour, it's going to be very strong, isn't it? We can see from its dark nature, so we must make sure we don't have it too dark, but also, in its dilute form, not too wet. It is getting the consistency of this paint right. That's what matters. And once again, we paint the lightest, well, the whole shape of the elephant, but obviously including the light, picking up a little bit of water to keep it nice and dilute on the top so it's not too bright yellow. And then we can pick up more pigment as we're coming down into the dark parts of the elephant. When you're laying your washes, lay the colour in shape rather than in line. In other words, see the shapes. Use the brushstroke to create shapes. Now we go in with our quinacridone red, and this colour has to be drier than the quinacridone gold, because we already have water on the paper. And we don't go as far because we are literally creating the tone with the blending colours. And because there's already a wet wash on the paper, the watercolour is taking this second added colour into it. So it's actually letting the watercolour make the blends. I'm not trying to make the blends, I'm letting the watercolour do it, because watercolour knows how to do blends far better than I do. And now indanthrene blue. This is a lovely colour, look at that. We need this drier than the quinacridone red. And these are carbon colours we know all carbon colours are totally transparent. So if you want to keep your colour radiant and deep, you can be assured that the carbon colours will do that for you. I'm picking up a bit more where it's darker down here as the foot turns underneath. So brushing it in, letting the water in the watercolour do the mixing for you on the paper. And now we mix our neat colour, indanthrene blue, quinacridone red, and this time we can pick up the yellow because the yellow is transparent. So we can make actually a black with this. Look at this. Because all the colours are transparent, we can make a black. And now we can bring in the detail behind the ear. And look how dry our colour's got to be because we're going into the wet wash. And look at that black. Look how black that black is. I just love watercolour. It just does everything for you. And once again we need the eye. It's lovely neat colour. Look at that black. Wow. Put in the eye just before it dries. I'm just going to take all the colour off my brush, pick up a little bit of the gold and a little bit of the red. And I can take, in a sloping palette, look, I can take my drier colour from the side of the wash. And just bring out the tusks. We can fine-tune little areas of colour with careful additional washes, but the paint is drying now, so anything we add is starting to disturb the drying pigment. Better to leave well alone. Let the watercolour do the job. Here are 4 elephant sketches so that you can clearly see the difference the colour combinations make. In the first one I painted, I used yellow ochre and opaque colour with 2 transparent colours, alizarin crimson and Prussian blue. In the second one, I've used 3 transparent colours, and you can see that the effect is significantly deeper in colour. In this third one, I've used 3 opaque colours. See how muted it is compared to the 3 transparent colours. Here I used cadmium yellow, cadmium red and cobalt blue. And in this Ellie sketch, I used 2 opaque colours and 1 transparent. Indian yellow, Scarlet Lake, which is semi-transparent, so not fully opaque, and cobalt blue. See what fun you can have with just 3 colours. Because we're mixing with water, gravity plays its part. Let's see what it does. Let's wet the paper to encourage the blends and see what happens. I'm going to start with a light blend of yellow ochre and then bring in some burnt sienna. Gravity can be your friend or your foe, so you need to be aware of it. Because of the meniscus of watercolour, you can paint at quite a vertical angle. Any time you slope your painting, any wet pigment is going to run in the direction of gravity. I'm painting now with burnt umber and Prussian blue, keeping it nice and wet. And I want to encourage the blends to mix on the paper, so I'm starting to raise the pad so that the colours can run downward and make those lovely blends that watercolour is so beloved for, tendrils running in the sky. And as before, the colours we're putting into the wet washes have to be a little bit drier than the washes before, but because we want the colour to run, we need to keep water in the washes. Let's put a nice violet in here as well and try and create a nice stormy wash. Can you see it now starting to run down? We're using gravity to blend the colours for us. The direction you tilt that paper in is going to be crucial. If it's running too far, tilt it back. If it's running not enough, tilt it forward. Use gravity to help create your blends. And when you feel it's run enough, then you just put your pad back down. Now, I suggest you still keep it at a bit of an angle, because then you're still keeping it running rather than pooling. As it's drying, you might think, oh, I want it to just run a little bit more. Or you might think, I want it to go this way. You have control. Use gravity. In this painting, gravity has been used to create this effect in the sky. Often we don't want the influence of gravity. Therefore, we need to work flat. Let's use the spots of this cheetah to see why it's important to keep the painting flat. Nice dry paint. At the moment, there's a lot of water on the paper. Here we are, practically neat sepia. We'll start with the eye, because we don't want that to run very far at all. But the beauty of going in wet and wet is that you get soft markings rather than harsh markings, and we control the run of the paint with the amount of pigment on the brush. So this lovely dry pigment is picking up the moisture and diluting itself on the paper. The sepia spots start here. The markings nearer the face are more burnt sienna. When you're painting something like this, if you're working from reference that isn't moving, like a photograph, do look at the direction the spots take, because gravity's not now affecting the direction they're spreading in because we've got the paper absolutely flat, but the direction of the spots is going to help create the forms. And I've got a mixture here of both the burnt sienna and the sepia. And as the paint underneath is drying, so I can use a slightly wetter mixture of the sepia because I want to make sure it runs. It's beginning to get too dry now to drop in. Look, I think, yes, it's got too dry. So now we have to let it dry completely before we can touch it again. Now the paint is completely dry, we can re-dampen it. And when I say re-dampen, I mean re-dampen rather than re-wet, because you don't want to put too much water on the paper, because otherwise you will disturb any pigment that might be sitting on top of the drying washes. So for example, dense pigment like the sepia is probably sitting on top of the passages of paint underneath. And then we drop in our sepia spots, and they soften as they spread in the damp layer. Literally, we're going to move from left to right. So you've sort of always got to plan with the watercolour. You've got to think. And I'll just carry on. Re-dampening when it's dry, but I have to wait for it to completely dry, and putting my spots in to the damp washes. Brush stroke is not just doing a concentric circle, it's looking where there's an ellipse because the shape of the limb is turning or it's going away and round. The brush can do all that. So you can see having the paper flat allows you to control the outward flow of the paint, and it then is just determined by how much water is in your mixture. Where we had too much water, it ran. Where we had just the right amount of water, it made a perfect spot. If you can harness the properties of this wonderful medium and then give it some freedom, you will master the art. Plan the painting, mix the pigment, lay the brushstrokes, and let watercolour work its magic on the paper. This is the essence of watercolour painting.
Now available to buy. Try these techniques at home whenever you wish. The extended DVD of today's workshop and the book that accompanies this series are now available from the Painting and Drawing channel. For further information and to order your copy, go to www.paintingdrawingchannel.com.